Restoration and Renewal. "So," said Luthamisla slowly. Her guide waited expectantly, head cocked to one side. "So," she said again. "We still know what the Rune of Wealth looks like, yes?" The Urizen architect inclined their head to indicate that they did. Luthamisla nodded along and continued to gaze out across the acres of ruined, burned, and broken gardens. "And we still know how to prepare all the, beds and plants and such, with weirwood?" Again, the polite nod. "Interesting." The Varushkan civil servant looked at her handwritten notes for several moments longer than their length entirely merited. "And the Urizen know how to create the magical constructs? The Ushabti?" For the first time, her companion showed some animation. "We do indeed." They allowed themselves a small smile. "In fact, with the completion of the Crucible of Fate, we're able to craft Ushabti like never before." "Aha!" said Luthamisla, intrigued. "Oh, now that does sound interesting. Very interesting." She glanced again around the devastation. "In fact, I think I'm finished here. I would very much like to see the Crucible of Fate now. Please?" Her guide raised an eyebrow, but didn't question her sudden enthusiasm for being anywhere other than the ruins of the Garden of Pallas, and gestured for her to precede him back towards the wagon. Overview. During the spring equinox, the conscience of the Senate, Aurelio Sanguineo Resia di Tassato, requested the prognosticator's office be instructed to appraise the gardens of Pallas in Zenith, being restored to their former splendor or beyond. The Imperial Senate agreed to do so, and after due consideration, the Imperial Auditor, Gerard LaSalle, selected Luthamisla Niegoslava to take charge of the project. The Gardens of Pallas were commissioned in the autumn of 380 YE by the Civilian Commissioner of Urizen, Juliana of Phoenix Reach. Built in central Iteri in Zenith, they represented a sinecure overseen by a head gardener of Urizen. The gardens were carefully laid out, so that the various beds formed the Rune of Wealth when viewed from above, and the Ushabti that tended the herb beds had the same rune inlaid onto their faceplates and chest. These Ushabti were specially adapted to the task of looking after the gardens. Each had a useful gardening tool in place of one of its hands, and cunningly made wicker baskets for collecting herbs mounted on their backs. Unfortunately, both gardens and Ushabti met the same fate at the hands of the Druge, smashed and burned. While the orcs of the Malum are known for their malicious and spiteful nature, this destruction was unexpected at the time given their well-known love of herbs and herb gardens. Some Urizen architects have speculated that the sheer beauty of the gardens offended the orcs who conquered the place on some fundamental level, and once they'd harvested the crop of herbs, they were driven to destroy its splendor. Restoring the gardens. Nothing remains of the Gardens of Pallas. The Druge left nothing behind when they annihilated the Gardens of Pallas. They were thorough in their destruction. Unlike the lost sinecures that provided crystal mana, the Starlight Drift, the Storm Vault, and the Tower of the Fall, there is nothing there to rebuild. Beautiful as they were a relatively simple sinecure of the kind any senator or bearer of an imperial wayleave could commission whenever they wished. If one desired to simply replicate the Gardens of Pallas, all it would require would be 20 wains of weirwood, 40 crowns in labor, and 3 months of construction time. The sinecure would create an imperial title. Luthamisla Niegoslava suggests Gardener of Pallas. It would provide 7 drams of true vervain, and 5 drams each of imperial roseweed, cerulean mazarine, marrowwort, and blade root. On the other hand, the appraisal suggests that the gardens be restored to their former splendor, or beyond, and, with most of a season left to explore Zenith in front of her, Luthamisla Niegoslava chooses to spend more time focusing on that than on simply restoring the destroyed gardens. Restoring the Gardens of Pallas. Commission type, sinecure. Location, Iteri in Zenith. Cost, 20 wains of weirwood, 40 crowns, 3 months. Effect, creates the position of Gardener of Pallas, who oversees a sinecure. Special notes, there is no time limit or required elements. It is not an opportunity. Increase of splendor. Marvelous Ushabti. Marvelous Ushabti could be used to work the Gardens of Palace. Initial investment will increase the cost of the gardens by 4 thrones. One of the things that made the Gardens of Palace special were the Ushabti who worked there. Within the limits of the artisans' arts, they were built to exacting specifications and tailored to the task of overseeing the gardens. During her stay in Zenith, Lutomisla Niegoslava visited the newly completed Crucible of Fate and spent some time talking to the artisans and architects, fascinated by the potential of the magical constructs built in the workshops there. She proposes that the new Gardens of Palace build on the inspiration of the original, but take advantage of the advances in functionality being made at the Crucible. After further meetings with magicians from the Golden Pyramid, she suggests a more ambitious creation. Commissioning a cadre of new Ushabti will require an additional investment of 4 thrones. The Gardener of Palace will gain the ability to acquire additional herbs by paying skilled magicians and artisans to work with the Ushabti on a season-by-season basis. Specialized Ushabti. Commission type, Improvement Ministry. Special notes: this improves the Gardens of Palace. Cost: additional 4 thrones on top of basic costs. Effect: allows the Gardener of Palace to acquire additional herbs. Change of scenery. Building the Gardens of Palace in Precaris incurs additional expenses, but allows them to be integrated with the auras of night magic there. The gardens would produce an amount of Realms Root, as well as traditional magical herbs. The original Gardens of Palace were built in Iteri in western Zenith. After her stay at the Crucible of Fate, Lutomisla Niegoslava visits the ruined marshes of Precaris, keen to explore the magical changes the Druge worked there. Imperial heroes were able to prevent the Druge magicians from poisoning the marshes, but the night magic worked there still lingers. After examining the aura over the region carefully, and spending a little time observing the final weeks of work to reconstruct the Golden Cascade, the Varushkan prognosticator has another suggestion. Rather than build the Gardens of Palace in Iteri, they could be integrated with the remarkable irrigation networks of the Golden Cascade. Doing this would also allow them to take advantage of the night magic that infuses the region, in a way the Druge would never have anticipated. By carefully modifying the designs of the gardens and including 9 mithril-infused monoliths in the shape of the Fountain constellation, this magic could be used to encourage the growth of the rare magical herb, Realms Root. Doing so would require the gardens to be built in Precaris rather than Iteri, and slightly increase the costs involved. An additional 2 mithril and 4 crowns would be required to create the required monoliths. If it is done, in addition to the herbs, the Gardens of Palace would produce 4 Realms Root each season. While discussing the changes with members of the Golden Pyramid Order, one of them mentions that some of the heralds of the Eternal Sodogwa are known to have some ability to cultivate Realms Root. Indeed, one of them apparently worked at the Spire of the Dark Moon, a garden spire that once stood in Zenith before being overwhelmed by the Druge. After its destruction, the Brother of Wizards offered to send the herald who oversaw the garden, the Silent Gardener, to offer its expertise to Imperial magicians. According to the Golden Pyramid, the herald is currently employed by Lumi's Tea House in Wintermark. Further inquiries lead to a meeting with a messenger of the Black Sloth, who says their master is interested in helping the people of Urizen, finds the idea of subverting the night magic of the Druge amusing, but isn't prepared to move the Silent Gardener, given its services were legitimately bought and paid for by Madin Bitterbark, not without explicit permission from Lumi of Wintermark themselves at any rate. Lumi could provide that permission using Missive for Sodogwa, or talk to the Eternal during a face-to-face meeting. But unless such approval is given, the Silent Gardener will stay where it is. In the event permission was secured, the Silent Gardener would move to Precaris and quietly take up a position at the Gardens of Palace. As long as Sodogwa was not declared an enemy of the Empire, the Gardens of Palace would produce an additional 12 doses of Realms Root each season, on top of the 4 doses from the improvement. Obviously, this would remove the benefits from Lumi's garden. Night woven locale. Commission type: improvement. Special notes: requires the Gardens of Palace to be built in Procaris. Cost: additional 2 wains of mithril and 4 crowns. Effect: adds 4 drams of Realm's Root each season to the Gardens of Palace. From the Bleak Tower. Some of the herbalists at the Bleak Tower might be persuaded to return to Zenith. A judgment by the Urizen National Assembly is required to convince the herbalists to return. If the gardeners return, they would provide a share of 40 random herbs to every herb garden in Zenith, but at the cost of reducing the herbs provided by the Bleak Tower. Many of the refugees who successfully escaped the destruction of the Gardens of Palace ended up settling in Morrow, helping to establish the Bleak Tower there. Today, the herbalists continue to work with herb gardens across the territory, exchanging seeds and expertise with their neighbours. This has seen a huge boost to the productivity of herb gardens in Morrow, under the auspices of the custodian of the Bleak Tower, Starakios of the Lighthouse at Nikephoros. Following her visit to the Crucible of Fate, Lutomisla Niegoslava makes a detour to Ravian to speak with the magicians and botanists there. Most of the herbalists who supported the Gardens of Palace have minimal interest in returning to Zenith. They've made new lives for themselves, and appear content to tend to the beautiful arboretum in Morrow, as far from the Malum as it's possible to get, and still remain in Urizen. Arbiter Cyrus of the Bleak Spire gently explains that for many of them, returning to the site of the formerly splendid gardens would be an emotionally devastating journey, and looking on the ruin of Zenith would bring only pain. A few, however, are inspired by the work done to reclaim and rebuild Zenith, and could be persuaded to return. If they do, however, it will take some time to replace their expertise at the Bleak Tower. Lutomisla Niegoslava is unable to persuade the former gardeners to return, but she believes that the Urizen National Assembly could persuade them to do so. A suitable mandate has been prepared to make the opinion of the Synod clear, and to ensure those concerned about a return to Zenith receive spiritual succor. The virtuous do not fear to act and face unwelcome truths boldly. We send, named priest, with 10 liao to provide support to the botanists of the Bleak Tower and help them face their fears. Potential Synod mandate, Urizen National Assembly. If this mandate is enacted, it will help empower those botanists of the Bleak Tower afraid to return to Zenith to face their fears. Once the commission was complete, some of the horticulturalists living at the Bleak Tower would move to the Gardens of Palace and offer their expertise. As long as the gardens remained intact, every herb garden in Zenith would receive a share of 40 random herbs each season, as with a great work. Unfortunately, without their expertise, the benefits of the Bleak Tower would be reduced. The bounty of herbs provided to the herb gardens of Morrow would drop from 80 to 50. If the mandate were enacted, but the Gardens of Palace were not commissioned, it would still offer spiritual support to the Zenith refugees living at the Bleak Tower, but would have no game effect. Bleak Tower support. Commission type: improvement. Special notes: requires a mandate enacted by the Urizen National Assembly. Cost: reduces the great work benefit of the Bleak Tower from 80 herbs to 50 herbs. Effect: adds a share of 40 random herbs to every herb garden in Zenith. Fountain of Green. Magician healers from Fountainhome Spire offered to provide expertise to support the Gardens of Palace. Their presence will share a bounty of herbs to mana sites across the territory. As well as the gardeners from Zenith, the Bleak Tower also attracted refugees from Spiral, driven out by a combination of Grendel aggression and the echoes of madness that roll back and forth across the territory. These included the survivors of Fountainhome Spire, formerly custodians of a unique grimoire called the Well of 9 Stars. The rituals that the book contained are now part of Urizen lore, but Lutomisla Niegoslava believes the magicians themselves may have more to offer, especially given that 2 of the rituals, Fountain's Bounty and the Woven Strands of Life, deal with kindling magical life in the natural areas of mana that create a mana site. After several days of discussion, Cassira Greenwell, the leader of the remaining Fountainhome Spire magicians, grudgingly agrees that they could offer their expertise to support the Gardens of Palace. Securing the aid of Fountainhome Spire requires the construction of a dedicated greenhouse as part of the Gardens of Palace, built to their specifications. This adds an additional 10 wains of weirwood, 10 wains of mithril, and 40 crowns in labour to the cost of constructing the Gardens of Palace. The presence of the Fountainhome magicians, however, allows them to spread their skills across Zenith. The restoration of the Golden Cascade ensures new settlers receive sufficient food, but the magician gardeners of Fountainhome can provide their expertise to each new spire. With their magical air, the general standard of life across the territory will be improved, with good quality fruit, vegetables, herbs, and spices supplementing the more mundane provender grown in Precaris. They will also help to cultivate magical herbs on mana sites, meaning every mana site in Zenith will receive a share of a bounty of 40 random herbs each season. However, there is one further proviso. The magicians of Fountainhome Spire have a great deal of affection for the eternal Ossagran, and admit that some of their advanced techniques rely on aid from the heralds of Lord Rain. If Ossagran was ever declared an enemy of the Empire by the Imperial Conclave, they will no longer be prepared or able to support the Gardens of Palace or the people of Zenith. Fountainhome Support. Commission type: Improvement. Cost: additional 10 mithril, 10 weirwood, and 40 crowns. Effect: adds a share of 40 random herbs to every mana site in Zenith. Slightly improves standard of life due to access to good quality food. Special notes: these benefits are lost if Ossagran is subjected to enmity. Implementation: any, all, or none of the additional opportunities may be included in the construction of the Gardens of Palace. All opportunities beyond the reconstruction of the garden are lost if not taken advantage of during the summer solstice. Each of the additional options mentioned above requires the Gardens of Palace to be commissioned. A single Senate motion, or use of an Imperial wayleave, can be used to begin construction of the gardens, and include some, all, or none of the extra opportunities. The motion must make clear which options are being taken advantage of, and the costs of the entire commission increase appropriately. These opportunities are only available during the summer solstice of 385 YE, however. While the Gardens of Palace could be built at any time, none of the opportunities are available if the construction is not commissioned before the end of the summer solstice, and none can be added at a later date.